And there's Don. What? Don's here?
Hey, what's going on?
What? How did Don pop up?
I just clicked the button, man.
Oh man, how have you been? What?
Yeah, I've been good. How have you been?
Oh man, I've been good. I've been good, but like you probably noticed, I did fall back into sin, and
I didn't know. I never heard that. I've been doing just keep living a simple life, bro. You know, unplugged from the internet for the most part.
but I like it's been like over 2 weeks since I did like fall back. So, but I was like 3 months without it, like 3, 4, 5 months without it, and I literally
What's
almost
good,
have no
fellas?
idea.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think going through the spiritual turbulence that many of us have gone through, I don't think that is and I don't think that's crazy that that happened. I most certainly felt very spiritually unstable. For instance, in that time I was coming out of the law of Moses. I'm pretty sure in my testimony, I confessed that just in the midst of that confusion, I had, gone back to smoking and drinking and, just it's stressful, but the important thing always is that you confess your sin, you repent with an earnest and genuine heart, and you get back to walking on the straight and narrow. Definitely this doctrine of being if you aren't absolutely perfect, then you have not truly put your faith in Jesus Christ, I think is false, which is what Chris more or less teaches, right? That you have to be absolutely perfect. I do think the wisdom of the early church, which shows that actually what the attitude we should have for new converts is you teach them and train them up into truth, and you don't baptize them, you don't consider them fully converted until they have become stable and strong in their piety, in their righteous walk. You come into the faith, and then you need to work out some kinks. You need to be tested. And once you get to a point where you have attained a certain level of consistent righteousness, it is at that point that you are ready for baptism. And look, for some people, that is almost immediately. Some people have that kind of that kind of a conversion. But on another note, I can't remember who the church father was that said this. It may be lactation. What's his name?
Lactantious. You might as well
Like,
call him lactatious.
or
It's the same
like
thing.
lactantious, right? He does have this one quote where he talks about how if a person falls, stumbles into sin as a result of confusion due to false teachings, that is, God has more grace for that, or rather, it's more understandable than a person who has been solid, who has been firmly grounded in the truth and has been walking in righteousness for a period of time and then reverting back to their sin. It's a different kind of thing. And so, we were all coming out of a lot of heresies, and um it was emotional, it was dramatic, unnecessarily, but nonetheless. And what's important is that that didn't cause you to fall away. That didn't cause you to say, you know what, I'm done with all this Jesus stuff. I'm giving up, throwing in the towel. You know, let's get back to listening to Lil Uzi Vert and, you know, cussing and just living in sin. Uh, and that's what's most important, I think, is that you get back up on the horse and you kept going. So I'm glad to see that you're still here, bro.
Thanks.
We all are.
Yes. Okay. Well, Luke, you want to get into the conversation?
Yes, let's get into it. Well, I guess, Don, you were just telling me that you've been looking into the Orthodox Church and that you've been giving them a fair shot. You've been doing it on your own time and studying it and trying to be completely honest to see if they have a good rebuttal to the accusations we've made against them. And so far, you haven't found any you haven't found much peace in the Orthodox Church's teachings. But
Yes.
that there's still great turmoil in your soul over your observation that this version of Christianity doesn't seem to exist anywhere in the world, and you would expect to at least find it somewhere else in the world, even if it were just a small group, and you just don't see it.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
go
If
ahead.
you go. Okay. Yes. So, yeah, I was just talking to Luke about if there was a denomination, Luke, I think you would agree with this. If there was a quote unquote mainstream denomination that was closest to holding to the early church, it would be the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. And when I say close, I don't mean that it is close, but of all the options out there, they at least have the facade of being trying to hold or acknowledge the early church the most, at least on its the way it advertises itself.
What I've noticed is not really that any of them read the early church or are trying to preserve the early church, but simply that they preserve the traditions that were handed down to them by their fathers, by their most recent priests. But none of them have actually gone back to the beginning to verify which things come from the early church and which things don't. They just don't really care. They are just preserving the traditions that have been passed down to them as of late, recently. And I'd say that's even true about the early church, that in the early church, they are not always investigating all the writers that have ever come before them, but that they're simply passing down what the last teacher told them. And because the last teacher always kept on passing down what came from the beginning, there were no variations in the churches. You could go anywhere in the world and they'd be teaching the same thing. But the Orthodox, they should be aware, especially after splitting with the Catholic Church, that there are major disagreements among the churches. And they should know that there were major changes in history. We know that after Nicaea, a lot of things changed. They were not just passing down what the fathers had told them after Nicaea. They were now evolving, and they were meeting the criteria of the criterion of heresy, which is just to innovate, to make some kind of development in teaching, in doctrine. So I don't think that the Orthodox really are admirable or inspirational to us in that they're just working so hard to preserve the early church. They're just as likely to preserve something wrong as they are to preserve something right, because they're just doing what their own priests, their predecessors have told them to do.
Right. But I guess the point that I'm making here is that are you surprised then that I thought, oh, well, if any one of these more popular denominations might actually deserve a fair shake, it would be the Eastern Orthodox Church. Like, there's a reason I didn't say, after coming into this understanding of what the true definition of heresy is and looking towards the what the early church fathers teach, the natural progression from that isn't, okay, now let me go and explore Mormon
Yes.
doctrine.
Yes.
Right? It would be, if
Oh,
anything,
of course, of course.
Eastern Orthodox.
Yes, I would
Right.
say that you're just as justified looking into the Catholics as you would looking into the Orthodox.
Right. And I would say they are pretty similar from that perspective. But someone here seemed to want to chime in.
Yeah, just for a second. It's good to see you guys, by the way. It's been a while.
Hey, how's it,
Um,
bro?
how you doing, Don?
I'm doing
Popping
well.
out of the woodwork, are ya? More low key than you used to be.
Oh yeah, man. You know, I needed to take a huge step back and um just be a private individual like most of you guys here, you know, enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, but yes, as you were saying.
Yeah, no, it's good to aspire to live, especially somebody who's spent time in the limelight. You see the beauty in aspiring to live the quiet life, which is good. It's a good thing to live a quiet, simple life. But I've been watching. It's funny because I've been watching YouTube videos about Orthodox saints, and the stories are just. Have you seen any? Have you heard or listened to any of these stories about these saints?
I'm familiar
Would
with.
these be more recent saints, or are you talking about Nicene?
Um, Oh man, I'm just getting in here. I mean, yeah, I watched Saint Gabriel. Some of them were older, like Saint George was like just post death, like Roman Empire.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Well, you know, as to not deviate, because Luke and I wanted to discuss this
oh,
very
sorry.
specific topic. I don't want to deviate too much, but to answer your question, no. If we're talking about saints, quote unquote saints that wear the title of Eastern Orthodox, no, I haven't. I haven't really been exploring those individuals. I've just been more investigating what does the Eastern Orthodox Church really teach. Pretty much everything that I've known about the Eastern Orthodox Church up until now has come from from people who were against Eastern Orthodoxy. So I've been giving them a fair shake, actually listening to Orthodox priests engage in debates, try to explain their positions. And I've been trying to see, okay, where does modern Eastern Orthodoxy deviate from what we see being held in consensus by the early church fathers, and trying to see how they reconcile these deviations and mutations. And yeah, and my current assessment is that they don't reconcile these changes. They don't justify them with any convincing arguments. Sometimes the arguments are illogical, sometimes the arguments are hypocritical, and it's been that. So that's where I'm at with it. And so that I was talking to Luke about that. You know, a couple of examples, two big ones I think would be the whole icon veneration. That is just completely absent in all of the writings of the early church. We do not see it at all. um their arguments that they use to justify icon veneration by appealing to images being used or in the Old Testament, for instance, you know, or physical things that you can look upon, such as the cherubim on the tent of meeting in the Old Testament, the and on the ark, the golden. Well, actually, it wasn't golden, right? Was it a copper snake that Moses fashioned on the staff when the Israelites were? I can't remember what it was made of, but he made
Yes.
a
Yeah,
snake,
bronze.
a bronze. There it is. And you know, these appeals, but guess these things were not used in worship, right? There was no bowing before these things. So trying to, for the sake of using them as windows into heaven or anything like that. And so trying to use these instances or examples from the Old Testament as a means for justifying icon veneration. Also, we don't see it at all. I mean, at all in being practiced in the Bible by the disciples. We don't see any instruction from Jesus that this is a valid form of worship, and again, we don't see it in the early church either. And so that, for instance, is a huge obstacle, right? That's something that it's just too big of a an obstacle to overcome, especially because they make it mandatory. If you look at they had a council, right? Nicaea 2, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken, a church council where it's not even a matter of, okay, it's an optional part of worship in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but they say anyone who is not willing to practice icon veneration is cut off from the Church of God. So, in order to be an Eastern Orthodox proper, you have to practice icon veneration. And and again, they further condemn themselves because we see modern Orthodox priests saying that that's not true, saying that it isn't the case that you have to practice it, that it is a lesser issue. And that in of itself is further evidence of the just continuing mutating of this religion, this deviation from what people believed earlier, even a deviation from what was practiced within the Eastern Orthodox Church just a few hundred years ago, a couple hundred years ago. We see this change in how their behavior, attitude to it. And not all Orthodox priests, I think, embrace this change. There are some who will stand on it, but just the fact that there's some who stand on it and some who don't is further evidence that the Eastern Orthodox Church is not this perfectly unified um, religion where they're all holding to the the traditions of the true church, that they're unchanging. It's so that's one example. And then the other thing that was very hard for me to reconcile is their position on divorce and remarriage. That's another, and it's one I notice you will not hear brought up by Protestants in debates when they try to prove that the Eastern Orthodox Church is not holding true and fast to the
Yes.
earliest traditions of the church. Why? Because they're guilty of the same sin. And so they don't want to bring up that the early church. In fact, this is even a stronger, in my opinion, argument than tackling iconography, because I've found that the Eastern Orthodox priests have a pretty clever way of wiggling out of that, saying, well, the context where all of the early church fathers were coming against the use of images or icons was specifically talking about the way how pagans used their idols,
Yes.
right? It wasn't a commentary on the use of icons within the Christian religion. So they have a pretty clever way of getting around that. But I would love to see how they deal with the fact that the early church was so clear, so unanimous on the topic of divorce and remarriage. It was not at all permitted. In fact, they went so far as to say that if you were a priest and your wife died, you still couldn't get remarried,
Yes,
right?
priests could not get remarried.
At all, right? And so that's how seriously they took it. And not that it would necessarily be, I don't know how you feel about this, Luke. Not that it would be a sin for that priest to get remarried. It was just tradition that they wouldn't get remarried for the sake of protecting the women of the flock, right? Because I mean, when you're a priest, you're in this position of power and authority.
Right. You can't be
You
falling
have
in love with people in your congregation. There can't be that risk.
exactly. And so it was a wise tradition that they, and look, if you're going to ascend to the position of a priest, you should be blameless. You should be an incredibly pious man. And so you should be able to check your sexual urges to that degree that you being told that you can't get remarried should not bum you out,
Right,
to
because
that level.
you've devoted yourself to God's service and to ministry.
Exactly. And so if you're the kind of guy, if you're married now and you're considering becoming a priest, and if you ask yourself, man, boy, if my wife died, I would need to get remarried, I would say you're not even fit to be a priest. You're not at that level of spiritual maturity, where you can handle that kind of authority. And so, anyway, point is, the Protestants don't ever bring this up when they're debating the Orthodox, because they are guilty of the same sin. They're all teaching divorce and remarriage, also contradicting what the early church taught. And yeah, if you study, hold on one moment. My wife is calling me. Let me
You're
see
good,
what she
Don.
wants. Let me see what she wants.
Yeah, the Orthodox do the same thing in regard to war. They will say, well, when the early church forbids war, they're just talking about a specific kind of war, not all war, just some war. War's still allowed. We can go to war against other countries and against other nations and even other Christians in other countries. So
Wait, why do they defend war?
that's just like I was telling you. They'll say sometimes you just got to go to war. You've got to start stabbing people. You got to kill them because, in certain circumstances, it's necessary. And they just simply reject that the church for 300 years categorically forbade war of any kind.
I also had no idea that it was a requirement to
Right.
venerate icons.
Yeah, it is.
That's
It
a
is a
requirement.
requirement. Yeah, they say anathema to anyone who does not show affection to the icons. And
Dang.
I think if I may share an opinion,
now, Mitchell,
that I just think
you may, but may I just ask? Now, be honest.
yes, go ahead.
Are you in the
Yeah.
Orthodox Church?
I am not. No.
Are you strongly considering it?
No, I've been spirit led to the church I'm at now. I found a place,
I got you.
and that's what this opinion has to do with. I think when it comes to any church, I think if we really want to understand God, we have to find these, like, that's why these stories of these saints has been, because it's about the saints and what these individual members of the body have accomplished through just complete devotion to God. I think that they set, and I think that's a really great way to growing your relationship with God. Although I love this subject matter because it's very interesting, right? I think that I've learned so much just from listening to these stories about the saints and about what their deep devotion looks like. Um,
Well, Mitchell, I will just
yeah,
say,
because
I do think we should be inspired by those people, and we do believe people were still being saved after the church started to fall into heresies. But we must not ever let the inspiring lives of the saints, cause us to reject the doctrines of the church, because the laity does not determine the doctrines of the church, but the leadership does. And those people who are closest to the apostles, especially, are the ones who lay down doctrine. So I would just caution you against saying that the lives of the saints should lead us to join the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church. I'm not saying you are saying that, but of course the Catholics
thank you.
do make that argument, though. They say that we were just speaking to an Orthodox monk in the UK who was telling us, well, what about all these righteous saints and martyrs who've been dying even in the last 200 years, who had such righteous lives? You don't think that they could really be part of a heretical denomination when they were such epic saints, do you? And of course,
Yeah,
our answer would be, yeah, they could be part of a heretical denomination. Absolutely. There are heroes in every single denomination, people who were very generous, very charitable to people, and who gave up everything, gave up their fortunes, gave up their friends and family to go and pursue what they believed to be the true version of the faith, but who were still deluded.
well, and also back, if we're looking at, say, even just 100 years ago, our choices in terms of churches were way more limited, I'm sure, right?
Oh, yeah, it's
And
exploded the
and
number of denominations.
yeah, so it's like, what choice do we have but to partake in a monastic, even with a perspective that, oh, okay, this does go against the word of God, but all have fallen short. That's not an excuse. That's not me banking on God's grace, but it just goes to show it's tough to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. It's not a walk in the park, but it's just interesting that these struggles occur.
It
So
is.
I do have a lot of love for what you and Don are doing, because it's like we can create a pure way of following this walk, right?
Well,
Yeah, it's definitely what I think makes it the most challenging is the lack of community. I think that's
Yeah.
what makes it more
Yep, yep.
challenging than anything else is the lack of. I mean, you cannot. I can almost guarantee you, no matter where you are, you can't find a church within 100 miles that holds to this doctrine, right? Or a church building, I should say, where there are a group of men getting together that hold to these teachings. And it is my hope that Luke and the brothers are able to facilitate that, and they're already building that. But this brings me back to what I was talking to Luke about before we came over here to the lounge. So I've already given you guys a couple reasons why I just cannot close my eyes to the contradictions or the things that are practiced today by the Orthodox Church that I cannot reconcile with the traditions of the early church. So that then brought us to this conversation. So why is it then? Why is it then? Because as you guys know, many of us just came out of a practice of following a very new a ministry with a very new theology. And though what we're practicing over here, or what we're striving to practice over here, isn't new theology, it's the oldest Christian theology there is. It is still familiar in the sense of, well, why is it that it's so hard to find an organized group of men that are practicing these traditions, holding to all of these beliefs? And so I was asking Luke, why does he think that's the case, that we can't find, any denominations throughout recent history? And by recent, I just mean within the last 1,000 years that are holding to the beliefs of the early church to the letter.
And I'll admit to you, Don, that I don't actually know what was going on in medieval times, for instance. The extent of my studies would probably be about like 500 AD, and I haven't looked into a lot beyond that. I have looked into the denominations that were being founded around the first and second Great Enlightenments or Great Awakenings, the one in the mid 1700s and then the other one in the mid 1800s. And during those periods, there were a lot of people saying, let's go back and read the early church. And one of those groups was the founder of the Methodist Church, John Wesley. Now, the Methodist Church today doesn't resemble what he taught at all anymore. But John Wesley was telling everybody, and again, he's living in the mid to late 1700s. He was telling everybody, read the early church fathers. And that was his reputation, that he was teaching them straight out of what the early church taught. Now, again, he was living during a time period where there were many, many different religions, many different new denominations sprouting up, a lot of them very crazy and very charismatic. Everybody and their granny was claiming to receive visions during the first and the second Great Awakening. They're not really awakenings, they're more like just the Great Delusions. And that's when Mormonism came around in the 1800s, and it's where Jehovah's Witnesses came around, and Seventh-day Adventists. And so John Wesley, the one fault that I can see in him, aside from he likes to have long hair, they all like those long hair wigs, those powdered wigs. He did have that. It's pretty embarrassing. But I've read a biography on his life, and he really did strive to try to preserve many of the traditions of the early church. But the problem is he had so many people in the denominations, or the people who were coming to him, they had so many preconceived notions that he had to tolerate a lot of people in his congregations just having varieties of beliefs. It was very difficult to establish any order. And he even complains in his writings that after he would establish a congregation and then he'd leave and come back and visit them a couple years later, they'd have completely different beliefs. So it was just chaos during that time, and it's still chaos to this day. I think even if we were to have the faith, guys, even if we were to be living righteously, because it is so hard to preserve it without an organized authority structure, people just tend to fall away very quickly. And if you don't do a good job handing it down to your children, it's kind of like every new generation, or maybe every other generation, consists of people who are starting from scratch because the children they didn't carry on what their parents gave them.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such an important key, I think, to holding this whole thing together is the authority structure, having the bishop, having the priest, having that one church. That's one thing when I was a Protestant, when I identified as a Protestant, that I always thought was interesting, how we always brush over the many warnings against divisions and sects, and how there was supposed to be one belief. It's how heresy and deviation, because in some translations I've noticed that the same word that gets translated to heresy gets translated to divisions.
Yeah, or faction.
Or factions, right? So those two are one and the same. Wherever you see a diversity of traditions, heresy is afoot. That is just clear as day, just by observing how two different translators translate the same Greek word into heresy and faction.
Yeah.
And we are warned that anyone who practices heresy shall not inherit the kingdom of God.
Yes,
Paul says it explicitly.
I'm posting a
And
few examples here if anybody wants some.
And so I always thought it was interesting how you'll never hear, well, I won't say you'll never hear, but this is not something that we see being emphasized in pretty much any Protestant church. Yeah, if anyone actually emphasizes it, is the free gracers, because they're literally insane. But beyond that, you don't see anyone advertising it, because collectively the Protestant church has to embrace this idea that you can have a diversity of beliefs and a diversity of traditions, and still everyone is Christian and everyone's saved, despite the fact that they are fractioning, or they're fractioning into factions. And that's why we need bishops. That's why we need church authority. And no, you don't become an authority just because you built a building. There's some people who seem to believe that because you constructed a meeting place, and because you start a YouTube channel, that somehow makes you an authority appointed by God. It doesn't. And that's not how you became a priest originally. And so I understand things are a little different now, but the point still remains that without a unified authority structure, it's inevitable that, like you were saying, Luke, it seems like every generation somebody has to start from scratch.
Yeah, it's terrible. Now, there may be groups, if we look into history, we may find that there are little groups that were trying to hold on to the early church. And as much as I want to encourage all of you to be perfect in your doctrine, to be perfect in your understanding, and it is possible, you must not be overwhelmed and think, oh, it's just too many things to learn, what's the point? Nevertheless, I am not the judge. It's possible that God has been saving people all throughout history, even if they were wrong in this or that practice. Maybe they had some sin, or maybe they had some wrong teaching, and God may be merciful to them. He may purge them in the temporary fires if he chooses to. I'm not the judge, but I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to say, well, because there might be a possibility that I get saved, even if I die with some sins or some heresies, I'm just going to, not worry about being perfect. No, I'm going to be perfect, because it may end up damning me. And even if it didn't, I still don't even want to have to go through any temporary suffering. I sure don't. If somebody sentenced me to 30 years in a human prison, I'd say that's terrible. And how much worse if it were in a prison that God had made for us to purge us of our sin. I'm sure it's going to be a lot worse than anything a human can think up. So I want to be perfect. I want to be righteous. It's within our grasp. We have all the knowledge available to us. But nevertheless, I will just say again, since I am not the judge, and it is possible that people have been being saved all throughout history, even those who may have lacked understanding. Because as Christ says, the servant who didn't know his master's will, but who still did deeds worthy of a flogging or a whipping, he'll receive but few lashes. So Jesus insinuates that he will not receive as harsh a judgment. We know that that's true. God is merciful. God is loving. He wants you guys all to be saved, but you still must cleave to antiquity, and you cannot just live as a filthy person. You must be born again and live according to Christ's commands. And if some wicked teacher has led you astray, then he will receive the brunt of God's wrath. But you need to take responsibility for yourself anyway. You know that you live in a time where the authorities have failed you and are not properly preserving the traditions of the apostles and their disciples. And ultimately, all these traditions come from Christ. Paul says that over and over again, that I handed down to you what Christ gave to me. So, yes, again, I don't want to discourage anyone from being perfect, but I still do not want to be so audacious as to suggest that there just have been no Christians in history until now. There have been, guys. They're just scattered. They're just a remnant. Those who are being saved are always a remnant. Even during the times of the early church, it wasn't every single person that was in the church that was being saved. It was only those people who were really sincere. Now, of course, with persecution, that does weed out a lot of insincere people, for sure. But it's always the people who are really sincere in their hearts and who truly love God and who truly obey his commands from the heart who will be saved.
I just wanted to ask you guys about something, if that's okay.
Yes, you may,
Yeah,
Mitchell. I've never
sure.
spoken to you before. Have you
So
been following the channel or watching any of our videos?
I haven't been watching their videos.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's how Don discovered
Link.
us. We have a channel just where we show a lot of quotes from the early church.
No, I got invited to the Discord group recently, joined, but yeah, God's given me a full life, and so I have that to explore many times more often than not. But I've been given an opportunity that I want to run past you guys because I need help with discerning what the right decision is. So um, I've just moved into a new place. My city is extremely expensive for rent, and so it's like really cheap. Like you can tell this is a blessing, right? I live with a friend from my old church, but I've also been presented with an opportunity to move to a place where people emulate the church from Acts, and they commission people who join this communal living essentially to sell all their possessions and give themselves to their cause. And so I'm really interested in doing that because I just see the benefits. Like I'm pretty sure I'm going to do it. I just wanted to hear your guys' opinions on things I should look out for as I go into this situation. Things I should be on the lookout for in case it could actually be, or should I even do this? Right? Maybe people back in those days they did it for a very specific reason. Um, I just see such the beauty in like getting rid of all of my things that I've carried around since I started walking in my faith and just starting new, right? Like starting completely as a moldable, just letting myself die essentially, right? But yeah, what are your guys' opinions?
It would be good to give up any things that are distracting to you. And I don't know what
Okay,
kind of lifestyle you live, Mitchell, but if you want to have private calls, if you just want to talk you and me, or just me and Nolan, we'd be willing to talk to you.
I'd appreciate that.
I'll
Yeah, I
give
could use counsel in this time.
you bet. How old are you, Mitchell?
29.
Okay, you're about my age. I'm 28.
Oh yeah, right on. But I'm only about year and 3/4 old as year and a half as
I
a
see.
Christian. So
Mitchell, I really would like to know all about your situation. I hope that you'll take me up on that and have a call with me. And Nolan and my other brothers are available to you to talk to you and give you everything that we've learned from the early church. We are just trying to let the world know about the writings of the early church fathers, and we're trying to destroy all the myths and the deception about them, because the Catholics and Orthodox claim the early church as their own, and really the Catholics and Orthodox secretly hate the early church. and they do not at all align with many of the doctrines of the early church. They've got baptism and the Eucharist and the Trinity and not much else from the early church.
Mm,
And the rest, they will,
there's so much to learn.
yeah, there is. But we'll
I'd
share with you.
appreciate your time.
Yes,
I'd
you bet.
appreciate your time. Yeah, I'll add you. When are you good for a call? I have tomorrow
I'll text you. I'll text you.
evening. Okay, we'll figure it out.
Yes, we
Yeah,
will.
yeah. But just going off the top, like just yes or no, do you think it's a good idea for me to move to this commune and just give up everything that I own? And
Well, goodness, Mitchell. Well, you don't even know where we are. Are you talking about moving to us or moving to somebody else?
no. I've come across an opportunity in my
Oh,
in my
Mitchell, I have
home in
no
my
idea what they
province.
believe. There's no way I could tell you to move in with them. I have no idea what
Okay,
they believe.
all right.
No,
Okay, I hear
I'd
you.
say be very cautious, and I'd love to know what they teach, but I fear it's something modern, as it almost always is.
Right. Okay.
But you
Yeah,
sound
just
Awesome.
very
without
zealous.
knowing much about it, I would, especially with my most recent experience, bro, I would say definitely pump the brakes on that. Probably not going to turn out good. Also, the early church, there are several writings by various fathers that talk about how the real key to spiritual growth is not it's not in not having anything, right?
Right.
It's not a necessary thing to actually sell everything you own and have no possessions. um if I could recommend anything, I would tell you to read Who is the Rich Man That Shall Inherit the Kingdom of God by Clement of Alexandria. And in it he does articulate the many pitfalls and traps and dangers of materialism and the avarice, greed, the pursuit
Mm-hmm.
of wealth. But at the same time, he very clearly articulates that money and objects in general, they are subservient to the man. It's kind of like that saying goes, money doesn't change you, it just makes you more of what you already are. And so
Mm,
it's one of those things. How can you help someone? How can you help a brother who needs a place to stay if you don't have a place, if you don't have a room to share? How can you give
yeah.
him food to eat if you don't have an extra loaf of bread in your pantry? And so, just as we are commanded to forsake passions and lusts of the flesh, and one of those passions is materialism, and trying to achieve a sense of self-worth through hoarding money and owning expensive items. At the same time, we are also commanded to help our brothers in need with the carnal things of this world. And you can't do that if you don't already possess them. So,
Mm,
possessions and money is not an inherently evil or bad thing or a stumbling block. It really comes down to where your heart is and what's important to you. So
okay.
I would be very slow to sell all your stuff and go live in a commune. I wouldn't advise that at
Yeah.
all.
It's been such a weird time for discernment because I do like to read based off of doctrine and then what's happening with my circumstances. And it just feels so weird that God would bless me with literally like a brand new church, like a church that I was spirit led to. It's like a strong, charismatic with, just passionate young pastors about service. I love these guys, right? I feel that synergy and then a new place. But also I know that God makes, he wouldn't give me this test if there was nothing to sacrifice, right? So I had very little before. So I'll keep praying about it, and I appreciate your input, guys, and thanks for giving me your time. And then Luke, I'll talk to you more about it.
Please do, Mitchell.
Um,
I really would like to speak to you. Please call me. I'll be available after 5 tomorrow, Central Standard Time.
Central Standard. Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
So, Luke, was there a specific topic that you had planned to discuss tonight?
There was. We were going to go over the very definition of heresy, so everybody can have that filed away in their memory bank. And Mitchell, do you have to go, or are you staying?
I'm hanging out, dude.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
this is we're putting on tonight, brother. We're
Cool.
getting we're getting down to it, man. I need you guys. So
Very good. And that's what we'll do. Well, then let's do it. Let's look up some quotes. I've got a bunch on my screen. I'm going to share screens for everybody. One last thing that I forgot to say is that you're exactly right, Don. We need fellowship. We need community with people. I'd say for two major reasons. One of them is for growth, and then the second reason is for accountability. My dad was reading the early church fathers back in the 90s. He was reading it at around the same time that David Berceau was
Oh,
making.
1 second. Mitchell, could you go ahead and mute, bro? I'm getting some background noise from you. Thank you.
there
All
you
right,
go.
go.
Well, yeah, my dad was alone reading the church fathers, and he already had a lot of sins. He was already divorced and remarried, and just was weighed down very heavily with guilt. So he never felt perfectly motivated to make big changes in his life. And he was also puffed up with pride against other denominations, because as he read about the early church, he thought, oh, I'm better than everybody. And it was this bad mixture of guilt over sin, so that you feel like it's hopeless to ever really live perfectly, but then also feeling better than everybody else, because you know everybody else is doing all these wrong things. And
Right.
Dad needed accountability. I wish that my dad had met somebody like I met Christian and Nolan and Aramis, who would hold me accountable. And if they saw anything lacking in my life, if they saw me going off the rails on anything, they'd say, Luke, you know better than that. You shouldn't be doing that. And it's good for wives too, because sometimes, like, they'll be, and it's good for husbands and wives, because maybe sometimes one spouse is living according to God's law, but the other one is fighting against it. And so they need, either a man needs another man to talk to him, or a woman needs another woman to talk to her and be a good example to her, and lift her up and encourage her. And it's just very hard to do it as a lone wolf in the world. So it's accountability, and it's also growth. I know that I have made so many strides in my understanding, not just for reading the early church. I mean, I'd be making strides all the time just from that alone, but having other people reading and submitting to the same authority, and all of us collectively saying, not my will, but God's be done, not my interpretation, but the authorities that God gave us from the beginning, who all agreed they will lead me, they'll be my guide, just as Paul commanded that we obey those leaders, obey those who rule over you in the church. So I'm going to obey. I'm going to obey the rulers. See, this helped me so much to have brothers reading the same material I am and always coming to me every time we got together, which would be all throughout the week, but especially on Sundays. They'd always have some word to give me, always some new insight or some doctrine that we've all talked about many times, but they'll add some more depth to it, and we'll say, wow, that is such a great new aspect to it. That makes perfect sense. And this caused my growth to accelerate, and by an order of magnitude, not just by 2 times or 4 times, but when you have everybody working together, everybody learns like 50 times faster, because you're studying so many different subjects, all of you together. So that's what my dad needed. It's what everybody needs. When you guys, when we have this fellowship, you got to realize how valuable this is, that it is not just 1 or 2 or 5 of us, but that so many people are all devoting themselves to learning about the early church and finding a true authority for themselves when it comes to interpreting Scripture, and leaving behind their own authority, their own misled supposed authority that Protestants have told them they have, to just invent Christianity as they see fit and to rely on their own understanding. Instead, all of us are relying on the authorities and holding each other accountable and helping each other to grow. And the same thing will happen to all of us together that happened to me when I gained 3 brothers, and all of us will grow at an amazing rate. And we will have a pure fellowship as long as there is that mutual, like it says in the scriptures, to subject yourselves one to another. That just says you're always letting your brother point out any kind of sin in your life. You're letting him do that. You're being open to correction constantly. You don't hate rebukes. You don't hate correction, but you're open to it. And so although we don't have bishops, guys, what we do have for the time being, probably will have until Jesus returns, is our brethren, having faithful brethren. Like it says in Barnabas, in the first epistle, he says, be good lawgivers to one another. And that's what we're doing to each other. We're reminding each other of the law, and so we can't like officially excommunicate anybody who decided to rebel against the church. But nevertheless, I mean, we still are the church. Every Christian, in the early church, they said if there's two or more gathered together, that is the church. Even if they don't have bishops, Tertullian says that. So that's what we've got to do. And I submit myself not only to my equals, to my Christian, Aramis, and Nolan, but I submit myself to every believer who has also submitted themselves to the same authority, to listen to any advice or correction or rebuke that they would give me. And I pray to God to give me humility, because without humility, none of us are going to be saved. And if we are guilty of any false doctrine, we're never going to come out of it unless we submit ourselves to the authorities that God gave us. Okay, I am now sharing screens. I did throw this together. I think it's still good, though, but I will definitely improve on this document over time. But I have a few subjects. I have the scripture on the subject of unity. Then I have scriptures on the subject of tradition. I just threw together, as we were speaking, like 5 verses. And then we have scripture on the definition of heresy, or at least what to look out for. And then I've got a bunch of quotes from the church fathers on the subject of unity, and then a bunch of quotes from the church fathers on I also have some on how the heretics twist scripture. This is also a bunch of quotes from the church fathers. And then an especially important section, which is the church's response to heretics. And this is a nice lengthy section, as you can see, very lengthy. Okay, what do you guys say? Sound interesting? Sound edifying? I hope it is. Okay.
Yes, sir. Let's go.
Okay, well, this is what Paul says about unity. Guys, the subject of unity is stressed throughout the New Testament constantly, that we are all to be in unity, and it is amazing how this subject is completely neglected in teachings in the churches. And how could they teach properly on it when they themselves are already part of denominations and schisms? You'll see that word in a lot of these quotes, the word schism. A schism is just when a group divides into factions. They decide to say, well, I'm not really with them anymore, for whatever reason. Okay, here is 1 Corinthians 1:10. Paul says, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same judgment. This says it all right here. If you could have any verse, I put it at the top for a reason. Today, guys, we have this philosophy of, well, let's agree to disagree. Well, let's only agree on the essentials. And we even think that we can decide what the essentials are. But you know what, guys? The churches can't even agree on what the essentials are. I agree with that principle. We all should. The early church says the same things. I think Ignatius, who was the disciple of John, he has the earliest quote on the subject of just agreeing on the issues that relate to salvation. He says those are the things that we must all agree on. But if there is any other issue, then of course people do not all have the same knowledge on it, but it doesn't mean there has to be a schism. You just accept it that, oh, my younger brother doesn't know about this subject yet. He doesn't have to. It's not essential for his salvation. But, of course, if somebody were to teach something wrong in the church, even though it's not a salvation issue, if he's teaching something wrong, he needs to be corrected by the leadership, and he would be. Nobody would be allowed to teach anything wrong, even if it's not a salvation issue, because just teaching anything wrong is a sin. Okay, so yes, no divisions, guys. This is stressed so many times in the scripture, just no divisions. And there is a list of things that we do know for sure that was delivered by the apostles, and those are the things we must all agree on. And if you guys have some speculation or some belief or something that's not, it's not something that the church ever spoke about, it's just some completely minuscule, inconsequential issue, then, have at it. It's not going to damn you. Okay, let's just read a bunch. Let's go. I always like to rabbit trail. Here we go. This is Ephesians 4, 1-6. Paul says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. And he continues. But do you see how many times it's emphasized? He says, well, there's one Spirit, and you guys are all one body, so you all need to have one faith. There must be unity of the Spirit. If you guys are disagreeing among each other and making factions and saying, well, I'm not with him anymore because he disagrees with me, that is a great sin. you are making division in the church, either because you're flat out wrong about something, or you're deciding to make a big issue out of something that is not an issue, and you're claiming that you have perfect knowledge on it and that everybody has to agree with you on it, but it's not something that was ever taught by tradition. It's just something that you think is important that isn't important. Yes, we must keep unity. And Ephesians 4:11, this is Paul again saying, and he, God, gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. See, the reason God gave us apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers is so that we would all attain unity. We're about to read Jesus saying that in his prayer, his high priestly prayer, but just before he was crucified. This is a very often quoted psalm where David says, "Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity." Peter says, "Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind." But always unity, guys, in all their letters, always being stressed. Paul again says in 2 Corinthians, "Finally, brothers, rejoice. Aim for restoration, comfort one another, agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace be with you." This is after he had written 1 Corinthians, where he rebuked them about some of their sins. And so there were some people who had been repentant of their heresy or repentant of their sin. And so Paul is saying, aim for restoration, guys. Be at peace with each other, comfort one another. And he says, go back to being unified. It is a requirement. It's a command. John 17, Jesus says in his prayer, he says that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Do you guys see that the world will not believe that Jesus was sent by God if we are disagreeing with each other? He says that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you've sent me. He's implying they're not going to believe. And look at the world, guys. Look at what a laughingstock Christianity is, because we can't agree, because we're all fighting about things. But there is a way for us to know whether what we believe is true or false. We have to go back to what was handed down to us from the very beginning. And Jesus continues in his prayer. He says, I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and love them even as you love me. That's how they're going to know, guys.
Yeah.
Yes, who's going to speak?
Yeah, Luke, about that. Yeah, I know how Sneeko, who introduced me to Don and then introduced me to faith. The reason Sneeko doesn't believe is because of all those denominations.
Yep, all the
So
atheists.
yeah, I run into.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one
It
of
is
the
confusing.
major arguments you'll hear from Muslims is they'll point at the very many denominations and how Christians, supposed Christians, people who all claim to believe in the same God, in the same Christ, can't agree on what the truth is.
Yes, but you
And
see how
so-
they lose the argument, because you always have to accept the premise of your argument before you actually give the argument. But the premise is that, well, if they do all agree, then they are reliable. So the Muslims, no matter what, they do end up having to admit that the church was unified for hundreds of years. So even though they're disjointed now, it doesn't mean that they weren't unified in the beginning.
It's a great point.
Yes. And we continue 1 Corinthians 12. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. Yes, guys, we're all supposed to be one body, all working together with the same purpose, all having Christ as our head directing us. And the head is where the mind is. So we let Christ tell us what to do, and we are just the body. We do it. We work together. We don't fight each other. And Paul says in Colossians 3, and above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. See, guys, we can have this. I know I've told this story many times. I know I keep doing rabbit trails, but I just have to tell you guys something. When I met my brother Christian, who we met about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years, time flies. We met him. He had already been reading the church fathers for 2 years. We had never taught him anything from the early church. I had been reading for a few years already, maybe like 5 years by that time. And I had received some of it from my dad also since I was little. But when we met Christian, it was amazing, guys. There was perfect harmony with us immediately after meeting him, because he had all the same faith as we did. He had all the same understanding because he'd received it from the same source. We didn't have big fights. I mean, I will admit, we had like one or two issues, like I'd say two, that he said, hey guys, have you read this in the early church yet? And we were like, oh no, we haven't read that. And he showed us and we went, oh, it's there. I can't believe it. It's right there. And we've not been noticing it. And we accepted it immediately. And we had perfect harmony. But just in so many issues, like everything, guys, and we're talking about a lot of different things that we grilled him on, and he asked us about. He asked us, what do you guys believe about this? And we'd give the answer, and we just go, wow, we're all listening to the same teachers. And it was amazing, guys. There was instant fellowship. Do you guys realize they had that in the early church? You could go to any church in the world. You could travel there, and as long as they spoke the same language, I mean, you'd have instant fellowship with them. It would be like old friends meeting for the first time. Every time you went to any place in the world that had Christians, they had the same version of the faith. And it's a terrible thing that we just don't have that anymore. There's a new version of Christianity on every street corner. And you don't walk into a church and have unity with people. You've always got to do this thing where they say, agree to disagree, because everybody's already at war, you know. Okay, here's Romans 12. Again, Paul says, he says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Again, always emphasizing harmony. Paul again says in the letter to the Philippians, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you're standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. Amen. He says again to them, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do you guys ever see congregations nowadays that are just a single mind, like a big hive mind? They're just one unit and they do everything together. That's how it was in the early church. That's how we're supposed to be. Here's Acts 4. He says, now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. See, guys, we're talking about, like, you know, where's the early church now? Where are they in the world? But, guys, where's even the book of Acts in the world today? I mean, let's just be completely honest. The type of Christianity described in the scriptures is not here on this earth anymore. At least if it is, it's in very tiny little corners of this world. And then Romans 15. May the God of endurance and encouragement grant you to live in such harmony with one another in accord with Christ Jesus. So I showed these quotes, guys, just to remind you, or just to show you if you've never seen it before, that in the scriptures we are commanded many times to be totally unified, that there must be no divisions, that we are all to have the same mind about all the same things. Okay, let's see some more quotes. I just threw these together. I'm sorry it's a little jumbled here, but in the scriptures we're told to obey traditions, the traditions that the apostles handed down to their disciples. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says, now I praise you because you remember me in everything and hold firmly to the traditions, just as I delivered them to you. Let me point out here, he says hold firmly to the traditions. Now these are clearly traditions that are not actually written in 1st or 2nd Corinthians, but he's telling them things that I've already taught you, that I was there in person with you, teaching you verbally, you were holding to those things. And he says, just as I delivered them to you. That means they're doing it exactly. In 2 Thessalonians, he says, so then, brothers, stand firm and hold to the traditions that you were taught by us, either by our spoken word or by letter. So in the Greek, he says either by word of mouth or by letter. That's two types of tradition. One of them is from oral tradition, oral teaching, and the other one is from, like, the Bible. And guys, we're commanded in the scriptures to hold to both. It's saying hold to the Bible and hold to the things that were passed down orally by oral tradition. And guess what, guys? That's what we've got in the early church's writings. You're commanded to hold to those things. 2 Timothy, he says, and what you've heard, he's telling Timothy, what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. This is kind of in the subject of bishops, and that they have succeeded the apostles as teachers, as replacements. And Paul says, for I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you. And then he goes on to talk about communion. But notice, this word receiving from, it's the same thing. It's the handing down. It's the same word for tradition. And Paul is saying the traditions he got, they came from Jesus. So when you're preserving the traditions, which Paul also handed down to others, to the leaders of the church, those things are ultimately coming from Christ. Do not let anybody tell you, oh, these are just the traditions of man. No, what Paul was handing down were the traditions of Christ. And so when he's saying, hey, it's degrading for a man to have long hair, don't think that Paul came up with that. Jesus said that. And that goes for everything that Paul commanded. And there's this wonderful verse in Jeremiah 6. I'm sorry, I grabbed it from the Septuagint here, so it's and it's Old English here. But he says, thus saith the Lord, stand you in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths of the Lord, and see what is the good way, and walk in it, and you shall find purification for your souls. But they said, we will not walk in them. So God says, ask for the old paths. In some translations it says, ask for the ancient paths of the Lord, and see what is the good way, and walk in it. So find that old road, guys. And, there's Sirach 39. I'm going to add it here real quick. Or, I'm sorry, 37. Or is it? Let me see here. 38. Yeah, it's 39. This is a book that was considered scripture by the entire early church, and even by the Jews, until they realized how many prophecies of Christ there were in it. And also that it's written by a man named Jesus ben Sirach. They sure didn't like having a book of Jesus. Okay, so in the last chapter, Sirach talks about the importance of the person who has leisure time, that he can study and he can become wise. He says, the wisdom of the scribe depends on the opportunity of leisure, and he who has little business may become wise. How can he become wise who handles the plow and who glories in the shaft of a goad, who drives oxen and is occupied with their work, and whose talk is about bowls? So he's saying that person doesn't have time to become wise. He doesn't have time to study or to learn. He says in the next chapter, on the other hand, he who devotes himself to the study of the law of the Most High will seek out the wisdom of the ancients, and will be concerned with prophecies. He will preserve the discourse of notable men, and penetrate the subtleties of parables. He will seek out the hidden meanings of proverbs, and be at home with the obscurities of parables. He will serve among great men, and appear before rulers. So I point this out. He preserves the discourse of notable men, and he seeks out the wisdom of the ancients. This speaks about Scripture, and it also speaking about all the wise, righteous men that have lived in history. And so I saved that. All right, we can continue now to some quotes on another subject. We are now on the subject of what the Scripture says about heresies. So this is 1 Corinthians 11. Paul says, for in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I believe it in part, for there must be heresies among you, in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. Now, in the early church, when they commentate on this verse, they say that when Paul says that the reason why heresies are allowed to exist is so that those who are genuine, those who are authentic Christians, may be recognized, may become apparent, he's saying that God always gives people a choice between something that's true and something that's a lie. And when Christ brought the faith to the world, when he revealed who the Father is and brought his perfect doctrine to mankind, Satan had to take a new tactic now. He knew that the other religions were just not going to be popular anymore. So all of Satan's efforts went to corrupting Christianity, to make false versions of Christianity, because the other religions, especially idol worship, was falling out of favor in the world, and everybody could see that it was superstitious and foolish. So what the church says when they commentate on this is that God allows there to be heresies so that true Christians can be distinguished from false Christians. Because true Christians who love the truth and love righteousness are not going to fall into some crazy sect that teaches all this insanity. Such as, well, I could give some examples. We'll talk about it some other time. But, there's some outrageous doctrines taught by people. We can look at the worst cults like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses and say, oh, they're insane. But guys, they belong there, a lot of those people who've decided they believe in those things. The children are not to be blamed. They're only to be blamed once they become adults and they decide to stay in those denominations. But there are a lot of dishonest people in the world, and they've been given a choice between heresy and truth, and many of them, because they are foolish and they do not truly love God and they don't love the truth, they choose the heresy. And that is so that, according to Paul, there must be heresies among you, so that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. Paul again says in Galatians 5, now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, heresies, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and these things. And I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So as Don was saying, heresy is a damnable sin. You must be on the lookout against false doctrine. There are two kinds of righteousness, and there are two kinds of sin. There are sins of actions, and then sins in the mind. And of course, speaking words, that would be in the realm of action. And likewise, guys, righteousness and purity are both in your walk, your physical walk, your actions, the things you do with the body, and also of the mind. And to have a heresy is an impurity on the mind. It's a taint on your soul to believe lies, to have perverted beliefs about any subject, especially about God and who he is. To believe, for instance, that, well, Jesus is not divine. Well, listen, that's a heresy. That's an evil thing to believe. You won't be saved. Your beliefs must be true. You must have truth in your soul to be saved. You can't be filled with lies. In 2 Timothy, Paul says to Timothy, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." And Timothy is one of those successors of Paul who took over after him and continued to pass down the truth. Titus also, another bishop who Paul set up as bishop over the island of Crete, Paul says to him, "Reject a heretic after a first and second warning, knowing that such a man is perverted and is sinning, being self-condemned." Every heretic, guys, practices sin. There is no heretic who does not also practice sins. And heresy is a sin, of course.
Could you expand upon that? So, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that anyone who practices heresy is also practicing other sins as well?
Absolutely. And there never has been a person who only has one heresy.
Yeah.
Anybody who's got a heresy, he's got multiple heresies.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how Jesus says, "A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump."
Yes.
Right? It is like a cancer. It is not possible to just have this one little error in your theology and it just stays contained like that. It always starts to contaminate other things,
Yes.
some in more egregious ways than others, right? Not all heresies corrupt the soul at the same rate, but they all do corrupt the soul.
Yeah. And what I've noticed from nature telling us this, and just the scriptures, and all of the church agreeing, is that everybody is like a plant. You're either growing or you're dying. Either you are rooting out all sin from your life and you're becoming sanctified and perfected, or you're getting worse. You're falling into more false teachings. You're becoming more lax in your actions. That's just how it is. If you are not becoming healthier and stronger, you are getting weaker. And the body is an image of the soul. You know, in the way God describes it, and the way the church has always described it, is that if you are a righteous person, if you're pure in your soul, you're almost like perpetually young. You're like always perfectly healthy and fit and strong, and that's what your soul is supposed to be. It's supposed to be very strong and fit. And when you have sins, it's like a disease on you. Just like a disease affects the body, it's the same for the soul. A heresy is a disease of the soul. And it paralyzes you, and it makes you disgusting. You know, some diseases are more disgusting than others, if you haven't noticed. Some of them make you, like your flesh rots, or you start drooling all over yourself, or you get gangrene in your leg or something and it has to be amputated. And God looks at your soul in that same way as we look at bodies. We're supposed to realize how God sees our souls by looking at each other's bodies. Now, of course, a person who has a sickness in the body, it's not an indication of a sickness in the soul, but it's an illustration of various types of sicknesses. We know, for instance, that blindness of the body is a symbol of a person not being able to see God rightly, not being able to recognize who God is. And Jesus accuses the Pharisees of being blind. Not physically blind, spiritually in their soul. And when Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," he's not talking about physically. He's talking about in a spiritual sense, in the afterlife. God doesn't have a body, though. Yes, so yeah, we've gone over a few things then. We'll continue. Always rabbit trails, but they're good. Yeah, yes, Don, you were asking, like, what does it mean then that knowing that such a one is sinning? He's just saying, look, you can just be sure that that guy is already self-condemned. If you've given him a first and second warning and he's still continuing the heresy, that guy is just a sinner. You can be sure. A righteous man will accept the rebuke. He'll say, you're right. I submit. And he'll be able to identify it for himself. If you don't already do it for him, he'll be able to say, I even know why I believe that heresy. It's because I was brought up that way. Or, I held on to this heresy because it gave me permission to have some kind of sin in my life that I enjoy. So I'm letting it go now. I realize now it's just being stubborn because of that. Okay, 2 Peter 2. Peter says, but false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies. Does he mean physically destructive? No. He's talking about spiritually, destructive to your soul. Even denying the master who bought them. When he says bought them, that means they were purchased with Jesus' blood. That means these are Christians, but they are people who fell away from the faith. They are denying the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of the truth will be blasphemed, and in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. And then after a few verses, he says, the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion, and who despise authority. What an interesting thing to say. These heretics who teach false doctrine, they hate authority. They don't listen to authority. Now today in the churches, guys, they teach that you can go to a church and listen to a pastor, but that pastor doesn't have any authority. If you don't like what he teaches, you just go to a different church. Well, guys, that's not how it was in the early church. You didn't have this smorgasbord of lots of denominations to choose from, according to whichever one suits your fancy, whichever one teaches things that are comfortable to you, or things that endorse some kind of lifestyle you're already living. That's not how it was. If you went in the early church, you'd find one version of the church everywhere in the world. And if you stepped into a city, you'd inquire, oh, who's the bishop of the city? I'd say, oh, it's Demetrius, so-and-so. Oh, I see. Where do you guys gather? Well, we gather over here at this spot every Sunday. Oh, I see. You guys would not have a bunch of denominations to choose from. And you'd either be part of that church, or you'd be a heretic and you'd go create your own denomination. But there was a bishop, and he would have apostolic succession. Apostolic succession is that somebody is actually connected to a bishop prior to him, who is ultimately connected to an apostle. So apostolic succession is this lineage of bishops who can trace their succession back to the apostles. And all the heretics were unable to do that. And this is something that the early church would always say. They'd say, like we're about to read this great quote from Tertullian, where he says, let them, the heretics, produce the original records of their churches. Let them unfold the roll of their bishops, running down in due succession from the beginning in such a manner that the first bishop of theirs can show for his ordainer and predecessor one of the apostles or apostolic men. We're about to read all these quotes, but yeah, again, people who despise authority, they're the ones who end up making heresies because they just have something in them that says, I will not obey the authorities God has given me. I want to be my own authority. I want to be able to pick up that Bible and interpret it any way I want. And Jude says the same thing in his letter. He says, yet in like manner, these people also, relying on their dreams, talking about their visions, where they say, oh, I got some new revelation from God. Relying on their dreams, they defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. You see the pattern? They reject authority. They're not listening to their true authorities. All right, I also put together some quotes from the early church fathers. Anybody have any questions so far from what we've been discussing? Nope, then I will continue. This is from the Didache, one of the very earliest books outside of the scriptures. And in the Didache, we are instructed, again, this is the apostolic tradition, written actually by the apostles themselves. They wrote the Didache. The early church completely is unanimously in agreement on that subject, that the Didache comes straight from the apostles. It even says in Acts that they devoted themselves to, and it says in the Greek, the Didache. But most translators translate it as to the apostles' teaching. Okay. In it says, my child, night and day remember him that speaks the word of God to you, and you shall honor him as the Lord. For in the place where lordly rule is uttered, there is the Lord. And you shall seek out the faces of the saints daily, so that you may rest upon their words. You shall not long for division, but shall bring those who contend to peace. You know how in the scriptures, guys, it tells wives to obey their husband as if he were the Lord, and it says the same about honoring the bishop. He says here in the Didache that honor him as the Lord. See, God gives us authorities, and he says, I want you to treat that man as if he were Jesus. Obey him. You know, it says, servants, do all your work as unto the Lord. When we have authority figures, we are to treat them in just the same way we would treat the Lord. And this goes for us in the church. We obey our leaders as unto the Lord. And you cannot be like a rebellious wife who says, oh, but I'm afraid to do that. What if he's a bad man? Well, you guys do know that in the scriptures, Peter says, even if your husband is perverse, he uses the word perverse, you are still to obey him. And the same goes in the church, that we are to obey our leaders, even if we don't understand what they're teaching. And if we suspect them of teaching something wrong, then what did they do in the early church? They would call other bishops to come and investigate the matter. And occasionally, if it was discovered that a bishop was doing something wrong, he'd be deposed. He'd be kicked out. Didn't happen very often, though. Okay, here's Ignatius. He says, it is fitting that you should glorify Jesus Christ, who has glorified you in every way, so that by a unanimous obedience you may be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment, and may all speak the same thing concerning the same thing, and so that as you are subject to the bishop and the elders, you may be made holy in every way. And he says, let no man deceive himself. If anyone is not within the altar, he is deprived of the bread of God. He's talking about the Eucharist. For if the prayer of one or two possesses such power, how much more that of the bishop and the whole church? He therefore that does not assemble with the church has even by this manifested his pride and condemned himself. You see how seriously they took it, that everybody assemble wherever the bishop has said this is where we're assembling? That was the church. People didn't have the freedom to go off and make their own groups. That was not the church. And he says in his letter to the Ephesians, he says, take heed to come together often to give thanks to God and show forth his praise. For when you assemble frequently in the same place, the powers of Satan are destroyed, and the destruction at which he aims is prevented by the unity of your faith. Nothing is more precious than peace, by which all war, both in heaven and earth, is brought to an end. And continuing in his letter to the Ephesians, he says, do not err, my brethren. That means don't make errors. Those that corrupt families shall not inherit the kingdom of God. If then those who do this in regard to the flesh have suffered death, how much more shall this be the case with anyone who corrupts by wicked doctrine the faith of God, for which Jesus Christ was crucified? Such a one becomes defiled and shall go away into everlasting fire. So shall everyone that listens to him. Today, guys, people put a heavy emphasis just on lifestyle. You'll see that a lot with David Berceau, who's very popular, who, as far as the early church fathers' writings goes, he delivers the early church fathers' writings to people and makes good CDs that summarize their beliefs. But he puts too much of an emphasis just on lifestyle, saying, well, if we all just try to, live righteously, it's okay. Doctrine is not as important. But in the scriptures and in the early church, they all recognize that doctrine determines your salvation just as much as your lifestyle. And he says, come together in common and individually through grace in one faith of God the Father and of Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son, under the guidance of the Comforter, in obedience to the bishop and the elders, with an undivided mind, break one and the same bread, which is the medicine of immortality, the antidote which prevents us from dying, and a cleansing remedy, driving away evil, so that we should live in God through Jesus Christ. Again, I quoted this because of this section, that we gather and we have an undivided mind, and we are obedient to the bishop and his elders who serve under him and who assist him in teaching. And he says in his letter to the Magnesians, he says, as the Lord did nothing without the Father, so you should not do anything without the bishop and elders. Do not try to make anything seem reasonable and proper to yourselves separate from others. Instead, when you come together into the same place, let there be one prayer, one supplication, one mind, and one hope in love and joy undefiled. There is one Jesus Christ, and nothing is more excellent than him. Therefore all of you run together as into one temple of God, as to one altar, as to one Jesus Christ, who came from one Father, and is with and has gone to that same one.
So, Luke, I want to pick your brain about something. So here Paul says that we should do nothing without the bishop.
Oh, this is Ignatius, but yes.
Oh, Ignatius, my bad.
Yes.
He says we should do nothing without the bishop, right?
Yep.
And what do you think then that means for us in today's world where we don't have these bishops that have come through apostolic succession? What would you think that a man like Ignatius would say in such a situation?
Ignatius actually does have something to say in that situation.
I'd love to hear that.
Where you don't have a bishop. It's funny because, of course, he wrote these 7 letters because he's on his way to be martyred. And so he quickly wrote a bunch of letters saying, guys, I'm about to be killed, so I just want to encourage all of you in my absence to be righteous. But he says, remember in your prayers the church in Syria. This is his letter to the Romans. Remember in your prayers the church of Syria, which now has God for its shepherd instead of me. Jesus Christ alone will oversee it, and your love will also regard it. So he's saying, guys, I'm about to be dead. The church in Syria, because, guys, he's bishop over all of Syria. And, of course, he was headquartered in Antioch. So they would call him Bishop of Antioch. But the Bishop of Antioch was the head bishop who all the other bishops in the entire region answered to. So he's saying, guys, well, remember in your prayers the church in Syria, which now it's just got God for its shepherd. God's going to be its bishop instead of me. Jesus alone will oversee it. That's us, guys. In the early church, the Romans would actually deliberately target the leaders of the church and kill them. And so during those times when the church didn't have a bishop, they would still be meeting together, but they were just waiting for a new bishop to be appointed. And they could not appoint a bishop themselves. A bishop must be appointed by other bishops. The people in the church could not do it themselves. They didn't have the authority. They, of course, would elect somebody, and they would tell the bishops who had come to ordain him, they'd say, this is the guy that all of us have agreed should be the bishop. But they didn't have the authority to lay hands on him and make him a bishop. So that's where we are, Don.
So would you say then it is impossible for a new true bishop to arise in today's world because there is no
Yes, you were talking about how in debates, when Protestants debate with Orthodox and Catholics, they will never bring up something like divorce and remarriage because then they'd be destroying themselves. But the same goes for the issue of the ordination of bishops, because the church all taught the same thing about how somebody is to be ordained and the qualifications they must meet to be ordained. And the people in all the churches today, all the fake pastors who get their little degrees from seminary and who think that makes them a pastor, none of them are legitimate pastors. So they would never quote the early church on that subject. But if they were honest and if they just stopped calling themselves pastors or whatever they want to call themselves, elders or overseers, if they were just honest, then they could really refute the Catholics and Orthodox about their fake ordinations, because their ordinations are completely illegitimate. They totally contradict the early church in about, 10 different ways. And we've made a long list of all the ways. It's not just 1 or 2 ways, but you can be absolutely certain that the ordinations that the church has been having ever since the Council of Nicaea, shortly after it at least, that the ordinations have been completely ruined. One of the main reasons that they're ruined is that in the early church, they taught that nobody, if any government official interfered with the ordination of a bishop, if he had anything to do with the ordination of that bishop, then it was an illegitimate bishop. And everybody else that bishop thinks he's ordaining is also illegitimately ordained. And we know after the Council of Nicaea, the emperors were involved in the electing of almost every bishop. And they also were in charge of the deposition of a bishop. If he didn't like a bishop, he'd say, you're not the bishop anymore. New guy. Go ahead and ordain the new guy. And so the thing that the Catholics and Orthodox flex probably more than anything else when it comes to their traditions, apostolic succession, is broken. Because there's even their ordinations are fake. But there are many other things that ruin their ordinations.
So does this mean then we should expect that you or Nolan or any of the other brothers would never bear the title of a pastor?
Never, guys. But if I'm honest, I admit to you that in life, guys, even though something like this I want to say also John Wesley, who went around starting congregations all around America, he would tell them that they're not bishops. He'd say, we are trying to live like the early church, but just so you guys know, even though I'm picking like you to be the leader of this congregation, and I'm telling everybody, listen to you, because you've got your doctrine correct and you're living a righteous lifestyle and everybody should imitate you. He would say, just know that you're not a bishop. None of us are legit bishops. And yet he would come back, and he, in his writings, he's very upset because these people are now calling themselves bishops in his absence. And he kept saying, guys, you're not legitimate bishops. That there are certain requirements that have to be met for you to be that. Rather, you guys are on your own. All of us are on our own because the church has totally departed from legitimate ordinations, and the succession of ordinations is broken. It's ruined. So no, I could never be a bishop, nor do I really want to be a bishop. But in life, guys, it tends to be that we sometimes have natural authority structures. Not that I have any authority, nor does Christian or Nolan or Aramis. But in life, there tend to be people who rise up and who try to lead others, like an older brother. And those people are leaders. But I just know I don't have any authority entrusted to me by God. None of you guys have ever been commanded by God to obey what I'm telling you. If I do have any authority, it only comes from telling you to listen to the true authorities. So, in a way, guys, we are running to the bishop. He's just not alive. We're running to those bishops whose writings still exist for us, and whose writings protect us from falling into heresies.
Yeah, I was thinking about how there's a scripture which says that God never gives us more than we can bear. And I know we oftentimes look at that in an individualistic way to say, okay, God will never give me as an individual more than I can bear. But I was thinking recently how that also applies to the church as a whole. And in the past, during the apostolic age, right, the real problem that the church had to deal with was persecution from governments, even though that does happen to some extent today in certain parts of the world. But I was thinking how today our battle is very different. It's the fact that we have been given so much materialistic wealth in the form of, if you live in America, or if you live in the West, you are probably in the top 1% of the world in terms of lifestyle.
Yep.
Um,
Even if you're
and
poor, the poorest of us are richer than kings of ancient times.
right. And one of the challenges that we have now is that we don't have bishops, but in line with the concept that God never gives us more than we can bear, we also live in the information age where we have access to all of these write-ins and
Yes.
the ability to have them translated into our native language, something that the people of the apostolic age didn't have. And
Yes.
so we have advantages they didn't have, just as they had advantages we don't have. And so it all balances out.
Yes, it's really it's alarming. What a coincidence. Of course, it's not a real coincidence. God works all these things out, but isn't it interesting how the Protestant Reformation aligned perfectly with the invention of the printing press? It happened at the exact same time, and the whole purpose of the invention of the printing press was to get Bibles into people's hands. And the first book ever printed was, of course, the Bible. That was the whole reason why it was invented. So God did intend that after the Catholic Church fell away and became damaging, became an obstacle to salvation rather than a catalyst, then God made sure that knowledge was increased on the earth and more people were able to access it. It was still up to people's righteousness, their own good and honest heart. They still had to be good soil in order to be saved. But God did allow us to have access to so much more knowledge, more than anybody in all of history. And nowadays, this generation, boy, are we in trouble. Because we have all the knowledge we could ever ask for, and so many of us are too lazy to get it. And Aramis made a video the other day on his little channel. I think he posted the link on here, but he pointed out how Jesus says that the queen of the Ethiopians, the queen of Sheba, she is going to rise up and condemn the generation that Jesus was speaking to at the time, because she left Ethiopia. She traveled across multiple countries to get to Solomon, to hear his wisdom, when she heard word that there was a very wise man who knew God and was teaching people about his ways. And she traveled many, many, many miles to hear that knowledge. And nowadays, people can barely be bothered to get just on the internet and just look something up. But I mean, travel is very difficult, guys. And God does expect it from us. If we were to live in one part of the world and we were to hear, or if we were just to have no knowledge, or just to be very confused about the truth, and where is the truth? And we were to find that there was some place in the world that had all the knowledge that we needed to be saved, we would be without excuse on Judgment Day if we didn't do everything in our power to drop everything and go to that place where the knowledge was so that we could be saved. But nobody does that anymore. And it is sitting right in front of us. Also, I do bring up this fact again. It is a really interesting fact that kind of puts everything into perspective. But guys, about half of all the people that have ever lived in all of history are alive right now. We know that there have been thousands of years of history, but right now, guys, due to the population boom, the fact that suddenly the Earth's population has jumped up to 8 billion, it does mean that most people, or like half of all people that are alive right now, are all the people that have ever been alive in history. Thank you, Aramis. Aramis posted the link if you guys want to watch that very edifying video he made. Thank you, Mitch, for muting. It was a little loud, but it's okay. All right.
That's crazy. That what you just said was just mind blowing. Just now, that severely microwaved my view on reality. So thank you for that.
Yes. So you might think, but what about all the people in history? What about them? Well, guys, like half of everybody that's ever been alive is alive right now. So they are without excuse. God is going to look at half of humanity and say, you guys all had access to all this knowledge. What were you doing? You could have learned. Why are you so lazy? Jesus said it. My people perish for lack of knowledge. Now, of course, there are people who live in the world who don't know everything, and God have mercy on them. He will have mercy on them. But you, what's your excuse going to be? You're not going to be able to say on Judgment Day, well, God, what about all the people who didn't know? You're going to judge them? God's going to say, that's my business. I'll handle that. What about you? You knew. Why didn't you do what was right?
So I have a question. Right.
Yes. Who is it? Abram?
Yeah, Abram. So I just have a question. So how do you explain these things that what you're saying to like your Christian youth group? Because I'm part of a Christian youth group on my campus in college, and recently I've been in my Bible lately, and I found out there's like a lot of things that disagree with them
Mm-hmm.
on some things. They're also kind of like a feminist type of Christianity too,
Terrible.
which I really notice. Yeah, and so but I really love these people, and they have actually like helped me in like growing in faith within Jesus. But I've just noticed these things, and I want to bring them up, but I don't want to cause any like strife or discourse within the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if I should just leave silently, or if I should just like explain it and go on from there.
Abram, a lot of people are asking that same question these days. And the best thing for you to do is to love your own soul enough to not hang out with people who are going to influence you to do evil and to believe lies, believe heresies. You are the one who's in danger by being with them. And you cannot let your love for them and your desire to help them overrule what is obvious, which is that you are the one who's in most danger. Call those people to come hear the truth. And that's why we made videos. We started making videos on a channel to get this information out to people, and we'll make more. We're working on it very hard right now. It's our whole life right now. Nothing else matters to us but just to live the true faith that was passed down to us. And I will spend time calling with those people, and I know my brothers will, but I will spend every spare minute I have with anybody who you bring to us who says they want to learn about the faith. We'll spend time with them. But just know that you are not in a position to teach anybody yet. And all of you guys, I've been meaning to say this to you guys, but many of you come to us saying that you're trying to teach somebody about the faith, but you're not ready to do that. You have to be a student before you can be a teacher. and I still consider myself a student. I must be learning. I really am hardly in a position to be teaching you guys. I'm still not even, I'm not almost 28. I'm not even middle-aged, guys, let alone an old, wise elder. And I'm only doing this because I'm forced to, because there are so many people in need, and I can at least teach you guys the basics. I'll teach you those things I know that the early church said, and I'll direct you to all of their own statements so that you can see my statements being validated. But you're not ready to be teaching anybody, Abram. So be very cautious. Be very afraid of misleading people, and just direct them to the truth, and direct them to us. We will give them all the advice and the exhortation that we're able to give.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a part
you're
of the reason Abram, my apologies. That's a part of the reason that I've taken a huge step back, is because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I've learned a lot since coming into this understanding that there is such a thing as heresy, and it's a very simple concept to understand. Anything that deviates from the original teachings. And so I've started to read these writings, and I've learned a lot in this short period of time, but it's also exposed that I don't know so much. And I do not want to make the mistake again of teaching anything that is incorrect. I mean, few verses in the Bible that have gained so much meaning to me personally. One, the warning that you should be very, very slow to take up the position of a teacher, right? The scripture that talks about the scriptures being hard to understand, Second Paul chapter 3, believe it's verse 15.
Wait,
You know,
second what?
not Second Peter. My
Okay.
bad, my bad, guys.
You're
I've been up
okay.
very early and it's getting kind of late. My bad. But Second Peter chapter 3, verse 15. And yeah, so it's don't feel, and this is some wisdom that I wish was given to me by someone who I really was confident that I could respect, that I was certain was truly a righteous person and was grounded in something that was so solid. Everyone else that is not grounded in the traditions of the early church are basing their interpretations off of their own feelings, off of their own experiences. That's something you'll hear a lot, especially from the Protestants, is they'll appeal to experiences and feelings. And appealing to the traditions of the early church is the most logical approach to practicing the faith. And so, yeah, some wisdom that I wish was shared with me, some wisdom I wish I had at the beginning, was that you do not have this responsibility to teach, even if you have received a portion of the truth, because the danger of leading people astray, I think, outweighs the whatever possible good you could do in sharing with them that portion of the truth that you have gained. Because leading someone down the right road, but then abandoning them early on, is worse, or maybe not worse, but can be just as bad as leading them down the wrong road. Uh, you know, something that I wish never happened, and not to deviate too much, I'll wrap it up here
That's
in a
fine, Don.
second. But, you know, in one sense, I am so happy that I was able to lead you guys to a few brothers that I think really do have the fundamentals down, brothers like Luke. But this was, in another sense, even this was not supposed to happen. You know, when I was leaving the last ministry I was a part of, an agreement was made that I would be allowed to take a long break and just study and grow in spiritual maturity. And because of decisions made from a place that were not pure and righteous, that plan kind of went out the window. And these are, of course, are the actions of another person, not myself. Selfish actions, you know, prideful actions. And so, yeah, man, this is something that we all need to take very seriously. And so do not feel as if you have a responsibility to go out and teach other people anything. The most I do nowadays when I get in conversations with people about Christianity and theology, within 60 to 120 seconds, I'm telling them, you know what I really think you should do if you want to learn the truth about Christianity? Go and read the writings of the early church. That's as far as I'll go these days. So that's what I would recommend. Explain to people the logic behind why appealing to the early church makes the most sense out of any approach, and then point them to the resources. And if they truly are curious, if they truly desire the truth and want to test these things, they will go and investigate it for themselves.
Yep. Did you hear that call we
Yeah.
had on bishops the other day, Don? This one right here.
No, I wasn't there for that.
They're all long. That's why everybody should just listen to them on 2x speed, because it's definitely a lot slower when you're doing it live and you don't have a script. But
Is that playlist unlisted, or?
Yes, it's just on the front of the channel if you scroll down to the bottom.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Also, we still believe in like predestination and like no Trinity, right?
Who's asking that?
Yeah, me again.
Predestination. Well, we just have to understand what is biblical predestination. If you mean, here's what the early church taught, and Luke, you can take this over.
Yes,
but
I will if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Abram, there are so many different views of who God is and who his son is and what the nature of his relationship is with his son and his spirit, that it would take you a lifetime if you were to investigate the beliefs of every single denomination and listen to the apologetics on every single side making their case, and then hearing every single person try to dismantle somebody's case, their belief. And God does not require that of you. All that God requires of you is that you go back to the beginning. And the early church fathers are the ones who first coined the phrase. We have people in the 100s, living in the 100s, who are using that phrase, such as Theophilus or Tertullian. And so, considering they're the ones who either came up with this phrase or received it straight from the apostles, we don't know, but they're the ones using it the earliest, so they're the ones who get to define it for us. They know what the Trinity is, and they were using it, and they all had the exact same view, that there is one God, God the Father, who exists outside of time, and he is all-powerful and self-existent, and that he begat a son who was born in the very beginning, and Christ himself calls himself the beginning. And we made a big video about the Trinity if you want to watch that. But Christ is the only begotten Son of God. He is the exact image and the exact representation of the Father's nature, as Paul tells us in Hebrews 1. And the Son is exactly like his dad in every way. He's like a clone. He's a duplicate. He's just like his Father in his personality and in all of his character traits. And so in that way, everything that he is, it belonged in the Father, who exists outside of time, and yet the Son was brought forth in the very beginning, and he received all the power and authority and divinity from his Father by birthright. and his Father gave him authority to execute judgment on the earth and to be king over mankind and over the entire universe. And God created the entire universe through his divine Son. And the way we worship God is through his divine Son. And every time we offer worship to his Son, it even goes to the Father, because the Son is the image of the Father. And so there is one God, and Jesus, who is the image of that one God, is perfectly divine. And so when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, he means that they are just like each other. They are one in will, they are one in essence, they are one in all character traits, all personality traits, and they are one in power and authority. And yet the Son is subordinate to the Father, and he obeys his dad, and he is a true son, and the Father is a true father to him. And Christ has invited all of us to be his brethren, as it says in the scriptures, and as we point out in this massive video, which is one of the first ones we made. So please do watch this video.
This is the best way.
And learn about the Trinity, and watch all these videos in this playlist. And as for go ahead, Abram.
Yeah, I was gonna say I will. Yeah, sure.
Good. The early church gives the perfect explanation of the Trinity. They had a perfect understanding of it, and you'll come to understand it by reading their writings.
So I have a question.
Yes, Mikey.
Yeah, if we have I have a non-believer friend, and I gave him a Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been going to the gym together,
Mm-hmm.
and he was more interested in it. And I told him, hey man, we could do a Bible study together if you want to read it together. Is that not okay?
That version of becoming a Christian, it never existed for so many hundreds of years. The idea of somebody being given a Bible and then becoming a Christian from just having a Bible handed to them. That's not how.
I don't think what he just wants. I don't think he's going to become a Christian from that. I'm just saying he wants to know more of it.
I see. But he really should just have somebody teach him the faith. And then in his own time, as he's studying, he can learn about the faith, and he can learn more nuance and depth of the faith. But it's possible for a person to become a Christian only through verbal teaching, and that is the ideal way to convert somebody, not by handing them a Bible. Or even, Mikey, even if you were with him, and you would be able to help him in some ways, no doubt. I believe that about you. Even you are so new to it that you wouldn't be able to answer those questions. He'd have tons of questions. And true discipleship consists of an exchange between two people. One person asking tons of questions and the other person answering them. And if you're just reading the Bible, it's just not going to work. Discipleship is lacking in the churches today. Just going to church every Sunday and having a pastor up there who just teaches random sermons on random topics, that's not discipleship. People who go to churches are lacking so much. They're lacking understanding on all the fundamentals of the faith, because today they don't have classes. They don't say, hey, somebody new is joining the church. Let him be part of this group. Back then, in the early days, guys, they had a group called catechumens. A catechumen was somebody who's a new learner, and they needed to be taught everything from scratch. So they would prioritize that. They'd take him aside and sit him down, and they'd be teaching him constantly, every single day, whenever he's available. They'd have an elder, some person who's established in the faith. By the way, I can hear myself. Somebody help me. But they would have somebody teach that person. They'd teach the catechumen and establish him in all the teachings until he had perfect understanding. Then he'd be baptized, and then he'd be with all the other believers on Sunday.
Okay.
That makes so much sense.
I shouldn't do the Bible study with him?
I would say, Mikey, it's pretty dangerous, but just invite him to come on over here, and I'll do my best to help him.
All right. No problem.
But, Mikey, I love your heart for him. I know you just want to help him. You probably do have some wonderful insights for him, but he just needs all the fundamentals taught to him. And then he's safe to read the scriptures. He will already have a firm understanding of the gospel and of the faith, and he will be less likely to fall into any errors if he's already established.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Ray, was that you who were saying it makes sense to do it that way?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. It's like ever since we've been brought to this idea, it truly does make more sense than just picking something up. And because once again, I'll bring it back to the beginning. Dawn said if it was that simple to interpretate something, then everybody would just be sent home with a textbook and there would be no schools. We
Yes,
wouldn't have teachers.
right. The pastor would go out there like all the Protestants say, the Bible interprets itself. If that were true, you'd have a pastor who gets up there at the podium. He says, today we're going to read from 1 Peter 3. And you read out the whole chapter and say, all right, everybody, well, have a nice day. See you later. And they all go down. They wouldn't need to have a guy up there explaining what it just meant. Yeah, they don't believe in the things that they teach. They'll make an argument against the early church and saying, those are fallible men. You don't need their commentary. And then fallible men, these teachers, these fallible teachers will get up there and they'll just start teaching away. And they'll even write books. They'll say, buy my book. Pay me $35. Because I'll teach you about the faith. I'll teach you everything you need to know. Pay me for books, but I better not ever find you reading the early church fathers' writings. You'll be in big trouble if you do that. Because those are fallible men.
Yeah.
And you don't need any of their commentary. Anyway, buy my commentary. And by the way, I even read commentaries. I read Matthew Henry Study Bible, or I read this or that commentary written by some guy who's born yesterday. See, they do read commentaries, guys. They are hypocrites, these pastors.
Okay, one more question. Okay, when do you I just randomly come in here and like see you online, then I join. So what are the dates that you're here in the lounge?
Yes, you're right, Mikey. We need to set a schedule. I am a family man, though. I'm married and I have 3 babies, and sometimes stuff just comes up, but I'm going to try to be regular, and I'm going to commission Aramis to do it too, to have regular calls. If there's a night that I'm supposed to be here and I'm not able to make it, we're going to have somebody else stand in. But I guess I'm the one that is available the most. See, guys, it's not that Nolan and Christian are not willing or able. Both of them are willing and able, but just not capable because of either work or some other responsibilities going on. Nolan's wife is she's very sick right now, and so there's stuff going on with them. So I completely understand. I appreciate the help, though, whenever somebody does come in and help to teach you guys, because they are someday, guys, Lord willing, someday we will all be very wise men. We're just getting started, but we'll be perfected in our knowledge and our understanding over time. So yeah, you're catching us when we're just starting out, and I'm sorry if we do not have all the answers to all your questions, but the reason we study so much is so that we will be able to answer everything. So we will set a date. To answer your question, Mikey, we're going to set dates, and a lot of people have been asking.
Because if I give him, because a lot of my friends, they don't have Discord, so it's like they'll be new to Discord, and it would be easier if they could just be like, okay, this set time, because they have work too.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah.
We're going to work that out. We're going to set a schedule. All right, well, it's almost 11 o'clock. We're running out of time. We might have to come back and do this another night. But before we do, I'd like to maybe just read one passage from Irenaeus. This is my favorite out of all the quotes from the Church Fathers on the subject of apostolic succession. This is a good one. It's very commonly quoted by Catholics. But of course, the Church Fathers go against the Catholics, so they're just shooting themselves in the foot. Okay, well, I think we'll read this and I'll wrap it up, guys, because it's almost 11. Okay, Irenaeus in his book Against Heresies, all the Church Fathers have the same tactic when they're tackling a heresy. They will say, listen, you heretics, what you're teaching can be traced to a specific date after the apostles. It's something that started. Your denomination is always named after the founder of it. So it's, we know when that guy lived. He's some guy who started living recently in recent times after the apostles. And he's got some new doctrine that none of the other churches have. See, with the truth faith, you can go to any church anywhere around the world and you'll find it. But with your doctrine, we can only find it in one location where it started out. And then we can see its gradual spread from that spot. But the apostles, when they split up, they went to all the different corners of the earth. And it doesn't matter which corner you go to, you're going to get the same faith because all the apostles agreed. They all had the same faith, which they received from Christ. So they would always use this as the primary point against the heretics before they even started dismantling the specific parts and contradictions within their false teaching. They would just say, listen, your doctrine is novel. It is new. Boom, you lost. That would be the end of it. And it should be the end of it for you guys. If you can trace the beginning of any doctrine that you believe currently to some founder who lived in the 1800s or the 1600s or the 1500s, you should reject that doctrine immediately. If it's not in the early church, if it wasn't there from the beginning and universally, then you believe a heresy. That's the definition of heresy, by the way. The definition of heresy means somebody's personal opinion. It's just the word opinion. That's what heresy is. Somebody who has their own opinion that deviates from what's universally taught. Heresy is anything unorthodox. Okay, let's hear this quote from Irenaeus. He says, "It is within the power of all, therefore, in every church who may wish to see the truth, to contemplate clearly the tradition of the apostles manifested throughout the whole world, and we are in a position to reckon up those who were by the apostles instituted bishops in the churches, and to demonstrate the succession of these men to our own times." So Irenaeus is writing this in the maybe like the late 100s. He was born in 130. So he says, we're able to demonstrate the succession of all these successors of the apostles all the way down to our own times. Those who neither taught nor knew of anything like what these heretics rave about. For if the apostles had known hidden mysteries, which they were in the habit of imparting to the perfect, meaning those people who'd been instructed in everything completely, he says, which they were in the habit of imparting to the perfect, apart and privily from the rest, they would have delivered them especially to those whom they were also committing the churches themselves. For they were desirous that these men should be very perfect and blameless in all things, whom also they were leaving behind as their successors, delivering up their own place of government to these men, which men, if they discharged their functions honestly, would be a great boon to the church, meaning a great benefit. But if they should fall away, the direst calamity. So he says, listen, you heretics. You heretics claim that there were just some things that were hidden that the apostles didn't impart to everybody, but it's just things that only special people knew about. And he's saying, well, if that were true, then the direct disciples of the apostles, those people who were put in charge of the churches, they would have known about that stuff. But obviously there's no hidden knowledge that the apostles just kept, in which some person who lived 100 years later had to figure out, or 2,000 years later for that matter. And Irenaeus continues in his argument against the heretics. He says, since, however, it would be very tedious in such a volume as this to reckon up the successions of all the churches, we do put to confusion all those who, in whatever manner, whether by an evil self-pleasing, by vainglory, or by blindness and perverse opinion, assemble in unauthorized meetings. We do this, I say, by indicating that tradition derived from the apostles of the very great, the very ancient and universally known church founded and organized at Rome by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul, as also by pointing out the faith preached to them, which comes down to our time by means of the succession of the bishops. For it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church on account of its preeminent authority. Now, some Catholics, of course, they love this quote because they're like, whoa, he says Rome has preeminent authority. But he's not saying authority over all churches. He's just saying it has authority because it was founded by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul. He doesn't say just Peter. It's both of them. He's saying it is ancient. It's a very ancient church. So he says it would be tedious to reckon up the successions of all churches. So he says, why not just do the church that is founded by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul? And he says every church should be agreeing with the one that's founded by two apostles. And he's going to give you the succession now. He's going to say, we know who all the teachers are in that church, and we can trace them all the way back to the apostles. He said, the blessed apostles, then, having founded and built up the church, committed into the hands of Linus the office of the episcopate. Of this Linus, Paul makes mention in the epistles to Timothy. Did you guys know that Linus is mentioned in Timothy? At the end? He says, to him succeeded Ante-Nicene, and after him, in the third place from the apostles, Clement was allotted the bishopric. So this is Clement of Rome, that we have his letter. And we also have a second one called Second Clement, and we also have the recognitions. So he was third. After Linus and Ante-Nicene, then it was Clement. He says, this man, as he had seen the blessed apostles and had been conversant with them, might be said to have the preaching of the apostles still echoing in his ears and their traditions before his eyes. Nor was he alone in this, for there were many still remaining who had received instructions from the apostles. In the time of this Clement, no small dissensions having occurred among the brethren at Corinth, the church in Rome dispatched a most powerful letter to the Corinthians, exhorting them to peace, renewing their faith, and declaring the tradition which it had lately received from the apostles, proclaiming the one God, omnipotent, the maker of heaven and earth, the creator of man, who brought on the deluge, that's the flood, and called Abraham, who led the people from the land of Egypt, spoke with Moses, set forth the law, sent the prophets, and who has prepared fire for the devil and his angels. From this document, whosoever chooses to do so may learn that he, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, was preached by the churches, and may also understand the apostolic tradition of the church, since this epistle is of older date than these men who are now propagating falsehood and who conjure into existence another God beyond the creator and the maker of all existing things. So he's saying, the heretics say that they have hidden knowledge from the apostles that nobody else knows about, namely, and of course they deny that Jesus is divine. And he says, well, you guys should go check out Clement, who is a direct disciple of the apostles. And he says, Clement wrote this letter, which we now call First Clement, and he says, in that, he says that he proclaims the one God, omnipotent. And he says he doesn't teach the multiple gods of the Gnostics. The Gnostics teach that there is God the Father, and then Jesus, and then another God called the Demiurge. He says, so Clement refutes you guys. You see how even Irenaeus says, this is an authoritative book. This is written by the actual Clement. And he refutes these Gnostic heretics. And he says, yes, these people conjure into existence another God beyond the creator and maker of all existing things. To this Clement there succeeded Evaristus. Alexander followed Evaristus. Then sixth from the apostles, Sixtus was appointed. After him Telephorus, who was gloriously martyred. Then Hyginus. After him Pius. Then after him Anicetus. Soter, having succeeded Anicetus, Eleutherius does now, in the 12th place from the apostles, hold the inheritance of the episcopate. In this order, and by this succession, the ecclesiastical tradition from the apostles and the preaching of the truth have come down to us, and this is most abundant proof that there is one and the same vivifying faith which has been preserved in the church from the apostles until now, and handed down in truth. And he adds one more section. I'll read this and we'll go to bed. He says, but Polycarp also was not only instructed by apostles and conversed with many who had seen Christ, but was also, by apostles in Asia, appointed bishop of the church in Smyrna, whom I also saw in my early youth, for he tarried on earth a very long time, and when a very old man, gloriously and most nobly suffered martyrdom, departed this life, having always taught the things which he had learned from the apostles, and which the church has handed down, and which alone are true. To these things all the Asiatic churches testify, as do also those men who have succeeded Polycarp down to the present time, a man who is of much greater weight and a more steadfast witness of truth than Valentinus and Marcion and the rest of the heretics. He it was who, coming to Rome in the time of Anicetus, caused many to turn away from the aforesaid heretics to the church of God, proclaiming that he had received this one and sole truth from the apostles, that namely which is handed down by the church. There are also those who heard from him that John, the disciple of the Lord, going to bathe at Ephesus, and perceiving Cerinthus, that's a heretic, a very horrible heretic, perceiving that Cerinthus was within, rushed out of the bathhouse without bathing, exclaiming, let us fly, lest even the bathhouse fall down, because Cerinthus, the enemy of the truth, is within. So he says, this is a quote of the Apostle John. He was going to bathe, and then he heard that Cerinthus was within, and he told those who were with him, he said, let's run. God might cause this whole thing to crash down and smash him, and so let's not be inside of it if that happens. And he says, and Polycarp himself replied to Marcion, who met him on one occasion, and said, so Marcion says, do you know me? And then Polycarp responds to Marcion, I do know you, the firstborn of Satan. Such was the horror which the apostles and their disciples had against holding even verbal communication with any corrupters of the truth. As Paul also says, a man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sins, being condemned of himself. There is also a very powerful epistle of Polycarp written to the Philippians, from which those who choose to do so and are anxious about their salvation can learn the character of his faith and the preaching of the truth. Then again, the church in Ephesus, founded by Paul, and having John remaining among them permanently until the times of Trajan, the emperor, is a true witness of the tradition of the apostles. And of course, they have much to say. The church fathers have many volumes of things that they say, but I really love this quote because he says, "You heretics, you're refuted out of the fact that you have no apostolic succession. Your teachings are recent." He says, "Look, I could do it anytime I want. I could give you all the list of all the bishops of any city, and I could show you that they have all received these things from ultimately the apostles, and that they have never changed. They've been teaching the same things all around the world for 150 years or however many years it had been by that time." And he says, "It'd be tedious to do them all. I'm just going to give you Rome, which was founded by Paul and Peter." Pretty cool, huh? Isn't this just excellent information, guys? Well, I hope it was edifying, but it is 11, so we're going to wrap it up tonight. Anybody?
Hey, Luke, real quick.
I'm sorry, bro. Yeah, no, it's a whole new world, man.
Well, Mitch, you are very new to this. We've got a lot of videos that give a much better introduction. This is not the best introduction, but watch the videos in that playlist. We've had such good calls, and we try not to be distracted and have rabbit trails. We've done a lot of that today, but it's okay. But usually we just have a nice, straightforward teaching session, and I hope they're very edifying for you.
I mean, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know what's going on, it seems it's just there's a lot of new information to dig into.
Yes.
So,
we'll pick this up, and we'll finish.
All right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I will be getting a hold of you tomorrow. Probably around 7 p.m. your time. I hope that works.
That should be
If
fine.
not, no worries.
Okay. We probably. Okay. I don't know if we're gonna have a call tomorrow, guys. We'll see. I'll let you know beforehand. Like a big...
Hey, Luke.
Yes. Who is that? Ray?
Yeah. I just want to say I love you, bro. Thank you for coming up here, always teaching, bro.
Oh, you're welcome,
such an asset to all of us. Really.
Is it brother? Oh, sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Is it Brotherly Advice, Luke? Is the YouTube channel?
That's Aramis's. No, but ours is Nolan started it. It's called Ante-Nicene Christianity. Nolan has been my brother in the faith for about 7 or 8 years now.
How do you spell Nicene?
Here I've got it right here for you. I posted it in the general chat, but I'll pop it in this open chat. Here, I'm dropping it right there for you. Here, wait, I meant to give you the actual channel.
I already got it.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Yo Chisel.
Yep.
So, who is post-apostolic church and when the line returns?
Nolan put those on as recommended channels just because we know them, but that was a long time ago. I'll probably remove some of those.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering.
They're people who are looking into the early church, but who don't necessarily see them as authorities. But post-apostolic church has just a lot of information, but yeah, I'm probably going to remove them both. Thank you for reminding me of that, Elisha. I don't think we're going to recommend them.
Man, it's so amazing to see what's happening here, because it's like we brought up some really good points today in the modern Christian lifestyle, which is, this church on Sunday and then what's going on, maybe like a prayer meeting throughout the week, but it's like, where's the real, how do I get to this point of walking in, a King David, a Jesus-esque kind of calling is what I've always wanted from this faith ever since I began my journey in this. And it's like, yeah, it's starting to come together now. So anyways, I'm ranting. I'm going to hop off.
That's wonderful to hear, Mitch. I feel the same way. I felt that way when I was reading the early church when I was almost 19. I just decided to read them because my dad had told me about them, but I wasn't really taking the faith seriously. And when I read them, I cried genuine tears. I just realized that this is all true. Why isn't anybody doing this? Why don't we want to live this way anymore? Why are there no denominations like this? So
super epic.
We're doing it now,
guys.
This
is the truth.
And I have no doubt there are other people, guys. Don't feel too lonely. There are other people around the world. Not everywhere is the USA. There are countries all around. There are people in the server right now who don't live in the USA. There are people all around, different languages. And that might be one of the reasons we haven't heard about them, is because, our internet is the English internet, and there is an internet in many different languages, and we aren't really mingling with each other. So I think there are many Christians, comparatively speaking, there are many Christians in the world. They are just scattered around, and they wish for fellowship. They wish that they could be part of us, and we wish we could be part of them. We are in spirit, just not physically.
Luke, quick question.
Interesting.
Yeah, you
Luke,
chisel?
do you have a video going over alms giving or?
Yes, I had it in the works. I was either going to do that tonight or do this, and we just ended up going over some of the, well, just given the definition of heresy, and we're going to pick this up because we didn't even get halfway through it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, we will.
Th-
I'm so glad to hear you are eager to do almsgiving and to do it correctly, Yo Chisel. The church talks about it constantly, so there's
Yeah,
lots of quotes on it.
I was trying to be clear, like, times when I should be giving, but then I'm not, and I'm being unchristlike, thinking I'm doing the right thing, and then vice versa, I'm giving when I shouldn't be giving. So, just to be clear on those things.
I would just hang on to your alms until you understand how to give them properly.
Okay.
Yep, just hang
Oh,
on.
and then another quick question.
Yes.
For studying the early church, because I'm gonna start in volume 1. I started what is it called, the introduction, preface, whatever. But for studying it, will you say just like read through it, meditate on it, and take notes?
Yeah, you don't have to read it in any order, but you might as well read it in order. And yeah, take notes. Take notes for me too, and for everybody, because you may notice something. If you ever notice something and you want to show it off to me, it might be something where I go, oh wow, I never even noticed that. So everybody should take notes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Look, did we record the call
Yes, we
yesterday?
did. Yesterday? Yeah, I didn't upload it, but I'll upload it. It was such a like wild call on so many different subjects. I wasn't even sure if I was going to upload it, but if you want me to, Kavan, I will.
Yeah. Only reason I mention it is because we did touch on almsgiving a bit, so he can go through it, scour through, and find. I don't think it was too long of a call yesterday, so.
That's true, but there are so many quotes on it that I think would just nail it down perfectly, and I don't know if that call really did that.
Right.
But
all right, guys. Well, I'm gonna head out, but yeah, very edifying lecture, Luke. Thanks for leading us through that, and it was great seeing all of you here again. I plan to be coming by a lot more often and just sitting in and listening. I am just a student, at this phase. I am embracing being truly a babe in Christ and submitting to the doctrines of the early church and just learning how to walk that out in my own personal life. If I can give any piece of advice from just what I've experienced thus far is don't feel as if you have to have it all figured out overnight. Don't think you have to become an expert, or have the kind of knowledge that these brothers like Luke and Nolan and they have tomorrow. They've been studying this for a decade. You just can't cheat that. You can't cheat that. So yeah. Well, all right, guys. It was great spending this time with y'all. Hope to see you guys again soon.
yes, I'm going to bed too, guys. God be with you all.
Good night, gentlemen.
God bless.
Thank
Good
you
night,
for your
fools.
service.
See you later.